Hello, everyone, wherever you may be, in the United States, in Europe, Africa, Asia, wherever you may be right now. So I'm not going to say good morning, good afternoon, or anything. It's just hello. And it is my pleasure to welcome today Dr. Kari Tabag, who I have known for quite some time. And today everybody will get to really see her, the people who know me and have been watching me for a while. I will get to see Dr. Kari Tabag and really hear the amazing work that she's been doing in the social work profession and beyond. Dr. Tabag has a bachelor's degree from the University of Florida and a master's degree from Adelphi University, where she also obtained her PhD in social work. And she teaches also at Adelphi University's Graduate School of Social Work. And she's certified as a supervisor in field instruction, which any social worker who is listening to us probably knows what that is. Dr. Tabag served as a social worker in a variety of roles, including being a social work professor, a psychotherapist, a consultant, clinical social work supervisor, social work field instructor, social work field liaison, college mental health counselor, director of wellness, and dean of student services. So she's been in the profession and very active for over 25 years. Dr. Tabak's community service extends to leadership positions and membership within several mental health organizations, including the National Association of Social Work and the Asian American Psychological Association. Dr. Tabag is a delegate assembly member at the NASA division and the NASA division director for the National Association of Social Work, New York State Division. She has been featured in the NASW NYS's New York State campaign titled This is Social Work, and established the NASW New York State Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Affinity Group. Dr. Tabag has published peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters and several articles for the New York Times, and the in a magazine for Filipino Americans in New York. Dr. Tabag is an active advocate and reflectivist for racialized, marginalized, and oppressed communities in public and secondary educational settings, while promoting cultural humility in research, academic, and clinical practice. Dr. Tabak's public speaking presentations center on microaggressions in micro, meso, and macro settings, and also on systemic racism, diversity, inclusion, and equity, DEI, and the promotion of social justice and advocacy among the Asian community and other racialized, marginalized, and oppressed communities. Dr. Tabag, I could spend all day talking about not just your accomplishments, but your work that really continue to happen and reverberate across the landscape. And so, are you tired yet?
No.
So
I'm
you're
told I
gonna
do too much, but I'm not tired.
you're gonna keep going. And I know that even your research, which you are still very engaged in,
Mm-hmm.
examines experienced gendered the experiences of gendered people, and
Mm-hmm.
you study racial microaggressions and psychological distress among Filipino American women, reinforcing your positionality and agency as a second generation Filipino ex a woman, and also for advancing your professional and academic development. I have actually heard you speak multiple times on these matters, and I was very thrilled to see you to attend your presentation in Kansas City just a few months ago. I'm happy, especially considering the state of our world now, that you're not tired and you're going to keep going.
Yes, especially when I know people such as yourself, and you make it very, very easy to be around, and to see you there at Kansas City was so heartwarming. It was wonderful. You were so inspiring. So I'm very humbled right now, and just listening to everything, I'm like, well, no, I'm not tired. It keeps us going because
So
they need our work.
they do need our work, and the world needs us. And I thank you very much for coming today. So when did you know that you wanted to be a social worker?
I knew when I was actually in undergrad. I was a teacher's assistant while working on my bachelor's degree, and one of my many mentors in my life thus far, has had. I thought I knew I wanted to work with adolescents,
Mhm.
but when I explained the work that I wanted to do, they had said, "Well, did you know about social work?" Now, this was a time where we didn't have the internet. I had to do the research myself in the school library. And I remember sitting with books, and I found the definition of school social work. And I said, oh, that's what I want to do. And so the rest is history. I think I started out as wanting to be an English teacher, and then it was, okay, I'm going to be a guidance counselor. Oh no, I want to be a school social worker. And I actually that's what I've been doing for the past almost 26 years. I've been a school social worker, but in all levels of education, kindergarten all the way up through higher education. So I did what I wanted to do. There were different pathways towards that, though, and I share that with my students all the time. I think I'm one of the very few social workers who didn't start out saying, I want to be a therapist. I started out as wanting to do macro and meso work. I didn't want to ever be a therapist. I was told, oh, you would be good at that. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do that. And so I did. And then through the school social work position, I was approached and asked, do you do this outside? And then my private practice started around that time. Yeah, very impromptu. And then someone took me under their wing and helped me get on the panels. And what I will say to those who are viewing is that it really helps to find someone who will mentor you and who will take you on. Sometimes you have to ask for it, and sometimes it just falls into your lap. And I wouldn't be here today without all of the people that are underneath, that were really behind me and underneath of me. And I will never forget that. So that's why I'm not tired. I'm always paying it forward. It's because that's what I feel that I need to do, that I want to do, to help those like people help me.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you said that for two reasons. Number one, when we mentor other people, very often they remember that and they carry it forward. That is one. It's also because for me, when I think about the importance of mentoring, I think about the fact that I'm not always going to be around in the profession. So it's good to have someone to know that there are people, just like we stood on the shoulders of some people,
Yeah.
that there are people that will carry the work forward when I am no longer here. So at some point then you realized it was important to be a clinician. And so how would you say that being a clinician, a psychotherapist, has also really helped your work in the schools with children?
It helped because I'm going to, there's no other way to say it, but when you work in a host setting, such as a school, you have a lot of different political lines that you have to abide by, a lot of strict boundaries that, quite frankly, limit your ability to help. So I found that working individually outside of a school setting was so much more helpful to the child who was no longer a student. They were a client. And also, it was something more of where you could be more of a representative, not only as a marginalized population as myself, but that I could also model that for the children who didn't have that.
Right.
So, and also the families were very welcoming to that. So I will never forget one experience I had where I had a teenager who really grew up in a background like myself, where we were really one of very few. And so we were both, we're both Southeast Asian, and we don't really have that a lot. There weren't a lot. There are more. We're all finding each other when I started in my studies. And it was more of a joining of, oh, wow, you're doing that. That's what I wanted to do. But we always have to deal with the model minority myth of social work is not something that we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be nurses, or we're supposed to be
and doctors and
right. And the medical profession, a lot of marginalized populations, not just Asians, but a lot of, because we're supposed to do better than what our parents were. So it really helped form my agency, my positionality, I would say, that's really what providing the individual psychotherapy has done for me as a professional.
right. So I can actually talk about the many roles that you occupy and all the things that you do. I'll just talk only about three right now, and you can talk about more of them. I know that you're a psychotherapist. You also work in a school district, and you have a leadership role in the National Association of Social Workers. And so do you see yourself as the same person in all of these roles? Or do you see like variations of yourself from one role to another?
I love that question because I speak to my students about that as well. And I thought about that when I thought about that question. I said, well, I do wear a lot of hats. And I think what's really funny is it goes back to memories of when I was a child and I would be in a public place and I would see a teacher. And we always, oh my gosh. And it's like seeing a celebrity, right? And there have been times where my clients have seen me, and I always explain to them in the first session, if you see me and I don't acknowledge you, I'm not ignoring you. It's that I'm protecting your confidentiality. But at the same time, I have learned that while we wear different hats, even when we step out of our house, wherever we're living, we have a personality that we must portray. So when I'm wearing these hats, and I'm in that role actively, I am not myself in the same role. So for example, when I'm a professor, I'm different than when I'm a school social worker. Behind closed doors, I'm different. When I'm working with my steering committee in the NASW, it's different because of the different job duties that we have. So, but at the end of the day, I make sure that I'm real and that it's really my personality, and each role that I play has my true sense in each one. It used to be confusing and exhausting and overwhelming in the beginning, but now, and I recently learned actually at a recent function, that I have a reputation, and it's carried over all throughout my educational career in where I work in the university and where I work in the school district where I am, and I'm known to have a voice. So
You're known to have a voice.
yeah,
Yes.
I don't keep quiet, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting,
Right. I will
So
tell you that one of the things that I tell my students is that social work is not a neutral profession. We take a stand and always stand on the side of the marginalized. And I also say that in doing that, we have a responsibility to give a voice to the
yes,
voiceless. I have seen you do that, over and over again. And I
yeah,
must tell you that on two occasions now when I've heard you speak, but especially in Kansas City recently, hearing all of that history and how the younger generations of Filipinos have been affected by that history of the past.
yeah,
And I began to say to myself, this is really giving a voice to the history that's not always told. And in some respects, it also made me begin to think that I should ask you this question, that as clinicians, very often we don't think about the political side of life, the political side of social work. But Deborah Stone, for example, argues that policy is politics,
yes.
and so the question that I have for you is why did you decide to become active in the NASW? Because we know the NASW also really stands for like giving that voice, amplifying that voice for people. and really just, so that means there's a political side to the work.
Yes. I really, and it's funny, that's been a late evolvement. And so I started with the Asian American Psychological Association. One of my mentors had said, they're starting a new committee. Would you like to be involved? And so from there, I started with that committee. And then I said, well, I like this. My term was up. And then the executive director at the time for NASW said, because I was known for having a voice back then, I was on the diversity committee. I started with the diversity committee. Mm-hmm. We really are looking for someone, and we really would like you involved. And I said, well, that would be great, because I've resided in that division for most of my life. And I found that there's certain areas that really need to be addressed. We're still working on it. And where I reside, it's the most segregated location in the United States. So I feel really passionate about it. And it's, and especially in this time that we're living in, it's getting harder. And there's so many people that don't have a voice. They have a voice, but maybe they're scared to use it. So I have no problem speaking up for them and representing them. And that's why I said, you know what, I'd like to do this. And now it's at the, I'm a delegate assembly member. So, am I going to be the president or want to take on a higher position? Not really. I like being toward the bottom. But it's been very fulfilling. It's community service, and rather than the stereotype of giving back to the community, I feel it's about representing and providing those that have a voice but are too afraid, perhaps, or reluctant to use it. And so that's what I like to do. And that's why I became involved with NASW.
Right. Do you mind this is some sort of a digression, but do you mind letting us into what I just talked about, that history that was a big part of that presentation in Kansas City, that big presentation? Because a lot of people do not know exactly that part of the Filipino history.
I love that you mentioned that. I specifically wrote down, I thought that I wrote that down thinking, I would like an opportunity to talk about that. And you read my mind. And for those viewing, we did not speak before this. So one of the things that the Filipino community is the most colonized Asian community. Out of all there's so many subgroups of Asians, and we are the most colonized. We've been colonized by the United States twice, by Spain, by China. A lot of people don't know about Japan. And so we have a long history of colonization. And so one of the things then in my research with the group of scholars that, again, that were supporting me, that are supporting me, we're supporting each other. And we all did research together. We did qualitative research on our experiences and finding kapwa amongst ourselves within our community. And we were speaking about our history of growing up and amongst the different generations. And what a lot of people don't know is that Filipinos were brought to the United States on Spanish galleon ships. And the first, and I wrote this down because I cannot forget, but I want to make sure I got this right. And it's October 18th, 1587, where we arrived in Morro Bay, California. Then they have us marked as arriving in Puerto Rico. And so in San Juan, actually. And so that's where our history starts in the United States. It goes all the way back to 1587. And so that's why October is Filipino Heritage Month. And I'm so happy, by the way, to speak to you. I'm honored. And this is Black Heritage Month, which actually is also part of the Filipino background history. So, if somebody was ever to say to me, oh, you're racist, absolutely. I find that, and you're discriminatory, I find that to be rather fascinating based on my history of colonization. And I'm still learning about my own background and all of the facets because of what happened with colonization. All of that was taken from us, but all that also influences our history. And so that's where we're at right now in our research. And we continue to work on being able to put the pieces together of our history. So we were looking at our own positionality. and how we're helping the younger generations after us, and also all because of all the assimilation and basically all of the racial trauma that's associated with that. So that's where I came in. I was providing my research and my presentation in Kansas.
Right. I must tell you that I came away from that with a lot of respect for your co-presenters that I did not know until then. For you, I have always had a tremendous amount of respect, and I was meeting them. But even though I had known you for a long time, and I had heard you speak, that was different. Because that presentation and talking about the research and talking about the culture and things that you knew, it was impossible to not feel some chills, and also to not feel, and not to even wonder how possible it is that one didn't know all of that before then. And so now that you are telling me that the Filipino history here, the presence and here in the United States dates back almost 500 years, how little, I mean, how shameful can it be, really? How shameful is it that we know so little?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And we all shared our experiences of why we didn't have that, because when, our families, a lot, like for really my experience, I can only speak to mine. I've learned so much from my scholars because my father came here when he was between 7 and 9 years old in order to bring the rest of the family over. And for most of us, we, some speak Tagalog or Ilocano, but my father, even though he arrived being able to speak the language, he was told, no, you will assimilate, you will be American. And so I was forbidden to learn it. I'm starting to teach myself some of the language and still learning when I visit with the family, the Filipino side of my family. I'm still learning about background or my own background, my culture, medicinal. I'm learning about medicinal treatment. That very recently I learned that we use certain tree bark for stomach ailments, for example. Every time I'm spending time with my family, I learn more and more. But the sad part is, and this was part of our research, is that as our matriarchs and patriarchs pass away, we're losing our history, our own familial history. And so we're really trying to grasp that as much as we can. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why my level of respect just multiplied was because I was asking myself, how did these young people learn about all of this? And so, please tell me, because I am an immigrant myself, and I want to be able to teach my history to young people. But how did you all learn all of that?
And I'm sure you heard about this, but storytelling is so wonderful. And, sometimes there can be a language barrier and a linguistic barrier, but that's okay, because I find that our matriarchs and patriarchs want to talk about it. Sometimes it can be painful and it can bring up racial trauma and ugly feelings and uncomfortable feelings, but they want to talk about it. They want to be asked. I think, though, for some of us, we've had an experience of that they don't really want to talk about it. It's kind of something to be seen as shameful. And so if we can somehow normalize it and, and make it more accepting, but it's easier said than done, because again, it does bring up really uncomfortable feelings. We'll never know what our ancestors truly went through. Right. And so it starts from us, right? It starts from us. We tell our stories, we record that. And however we want to record that, by talking, we have a video here going on right now. We can write about it however we see fit. We need to do that. That's very important.
It is. I completely agree with you. Yeah, I really do. And so now we can talk talk about your research. Your research focuses on the relationship between microaggressions and psychological distress. Mm-hmm. So if you could just please take a few minutes and tell us what we should know about this. For example, what are microaggressions, and why does it make for an important discussion? And
Yeah.
from your practice experience, how does this impact the lives of people?
Yeah. Well, so let me start with microaggressions. So microaggressions sound tricky, but they're really not. And the reason why I say that they're tricky is because there's some who argue that they don't exist. So when I first started my research, you didn't really hear of microaggressions. I was one of the first in the school where I started to really dig through it. Also, the theory that was one of many part of my theoretical framework was critical race theory. It breaks my heart to hear that they're actually looking to not include it in research, that they're not allowing it. Critical race theory is one of the theories that started in the profession of law. And it started with the Black community. And it really started, and there's so many different branches to critical race theory. And so we look at critical race theory as a theoretical framework at looking at microaggressions, and there's different types of microaggressions. And the ones that I included in my research were gendered racial microaggressions because my population were Filipino American women. So if we look at microaggressions themselves, they're subtle. Sometimes the person who is making these microaggression statements, it's really not intentional. So I say that they're really indirect or they're covert, right? They're hidden. And then they can also be nonverbal and verbal. And a lot of our communication is really composed of nonverbal language. So it can be a look, it can be a gesture. And it's discriminatory. It's a form of discrimination against a marginalized population. And I find that microaggressions sometimes are misconstrued and they're misused and they're misapplied, right? So we're really here to promote, when we talk about microaggressions, we're really here to promote awareness about them because of their lasting effects. They're really hidden. And it's not something that's really something recognized and easily identified in those who are experiencing them. And that's something, and that's why I wanted to look at that form of discrimination. It was definitely under-researched, and it still is, especially amongst this population.
So how would we know, for example, that we are on the other side, or that we are being perpetrators of microaggressions, and that we are experiencing microaggressions, or we are dishing it out to other people? How would we know?
So in other words, how would we know that we're experiencing them or that we are making microaggression
Both.
statements?
Both.
So we'll start with experiencing them.
Right.
And that's the thing with microaggressions, is that there's something actually called microinvalidations, where we question, we follow our gut. Our gut never lies to us. We know if something doesn't feel right. What was that, especially amongst certain marginalized populations, as well as the intersection of gender and race. We know when something's not right. So, for example, I can only really speak of my own positionality and my experiences. So as a Filipino American woman, and this is part of my study, we were also looking at the different microaggression statements, putting model minority aside. For Filipino American women, you speak really good English. That's a well-known microaggression, a category of it. I've been accused of being really good at math, which is the biggest joke. Are you a nurse? I've been asked that. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked if I'm a nurse. Oh, you're a psychologist. No, I'm proudly a social worker. Because again, there weren't a lot, but now there is. And it's beautiful when I meet a student who actually, I had one approach me and say, I am a social worker. I want to be a social worker and I'm Filipino. Oh my gosh. Right. And so, but my family wants me to be this or that. And so that in itself is a microaggression when people make those statements, but they're unintentional. Mm-hmm. Right. But they're putting them into a category. Now, when that happens over time after time after time, there's something that we refer to as, and Daryl Wing Su, right, who was one of the founding scholars of microaggression theory, which was basically at the another part of my theoretical framework. He basically speaks about how it's death by 1,000 cuts. These are micro traumas that happen over time. Hearing them over and over and over and over again. Well, if you have a piece of paper and you make tiny, 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 tiny rips over time, it's damaging. And so that's how we can look at microaggressions. There's different categories. I'm not going to bore you with the time of going through all of them, but just giving you some examples of them. One of them that I do get annoyed with a lot is also the statements that are made and how the media portrays Asian women with as, which I think is really funny, because maybe I overcompensate a little bit. Here I go analyzing myself. Maybe I do overcompensate, but the stereotype, the microaggressions of Asian women being submissive. I'm definitely not that. And being meek and submissive and very complacent. And I'm happy to say that those I surround myself with that also have the same background, we are not. I don't know anybody who's like that. And the other one is the exoticization, the sexism that we experience. And I think about how that still goes on to this day. And I'm afraid, and I'll put it out there, I'm afraid of what's going to happen with our current state of political affairs.
That, I'm glad you brought that up. And as we talk about microaggressions, and they're not as really to your face sometimes, as other forms of aggression. So I am wondering if you think, because that's one concern that I have, because it seems like the messages are all around us.
Yes.
So there is a license now to be blatantly aggressive. And it's perfectly fine. You can get away with it.
Yeah.
So there are going to be, in the trail of this whole experience, a lot of people who have to contend with the lingering effects of trauma from microaggressions or blatant aggression.
Yeah.
My question then is, what would be a suggestion for people who are experiencing some of these things that we're talking about today?
We get to a point where we have to pick and choose our battles. Know your surroundings. Like when we do CPR, and AED, I went through that renewal training recently. And one of the first things they say is make sure the area is safe. And I think that no matter who this person is that is responding to a microaggression, know your audience, consider the source. Yeah. Is this somebody that you're comfortable with? Is this somebody that is trustworthy, that is worth your time? What is the situation? We have to pick and choose. Is it worth saying something? And one of the best responses is, why do you say that? Or what do you mean? Trying to get more information and having the person talk about it as we have that conversation, because this is what I do. That's interesting. What do you mean by that? And as the person's talking about it and explaining it, I'm hoping in my mind that they're catching themselves. And it has happened, especially when we talk about something that, look, whether microaggression or not, if something offends you, it's a really good measure to say, oh, that's interesting. Why do you say that? Tell me more, explain more. But there have been other times where there has been a statement, even on social media. I literally bring my hands up to the keyboard and I want to make a comment and point out the microaggression that's being, and I'm thinking, this isn't worth it, because these people don't know who I am. But if it's a really good friend of mine, I will do that. I had a friend contact me and ask me about, what kind of rice cooker should I get? And I had to point it out to them. And I said it jokingly, but they got offended by that, because they might have gotten more upset with themselves for saying that. So, there's things like that. And that was a really good friend of mine. I shouldn't say is a really good friend of mine for years. And so, of course, I'm going to say that. And they said, yes, I know you researched that. Yes, I know about your research. They were laughing. So I was like, well, I had to say something, So it really depends. But you know what? And at the end of the day, don't hold on to it and don't take it with you. This is about them. It's not about you.
And in terms of saying something, we have experiences sometimes when something happens in front of us
Yeah.
and we don't say anything. And later, if our conscience is activated, we begin to feel bad for not saying something. So when it comes to microaggressions, what if you are present and you experience someone
Mhm.
being the recipient of a microaggression? Do you suggest that if the environment is right, that the witness should say something?
Again, I think it depends on if they are worth it, if you are worth it, which you definitely are. And looking at your audience that's there as well. So for example, if a student made a statement to me in front of the entire class, I wouldn't respond to it in front of the entire class. I might speak to them after if I feel that it's really something that I can turn into an educational tool. And that has happened. And so that's how I handle that. So I don't know if I completely answered your question, but it comes down to, look, like, here I am in New York. If I'm on the subway and I see something happening to someone, I need to look around and make sure I'm not the only one there so that I have backup. But I'm not going to be a bystander. I'm going to be an upstander. So it really depends on the situation. Have I been in the presence of others that are, receiving the microaggression statement? Absolutely. And then you need to make sure with that person, hey, are you okay? And there you are to help with a micro invalidation. Sometimes validating someone's experiences of a microaggression, and that's what I do in my psychotherapy, just validating them, because that is a form of microaggression, that micro invalidation. No, I didn't say that. That's not what I meant. Okay, well, this is how I received it. That really helps us rather than holding it in. And then we start to experience that racial oppression, which can lead to depression and anxiety and that post-traumatic, stress in a lot of cases, that racial trauma. So that
Yeah,
was part of my research too. Yeah.
right. I have a question that will require you to speak to us
Okay.
as a therapist. It comes directly from what you brought up before, which I also followed up on a bit, but this is a time to just blow it open.
Okay.
Uh, the fact that sometimes groups of people can experience trauma with lasting effects. I would like you to describe what that would look like against the background of what we as a country are currently going through right now, and one would say actually much of the world, because the United States really leads the world.
Yes.
So it seems to me that right now we can actually say that we are a traumatized nation,
Oh, yeah.
and that our world is also really increasingly just getting traumatized because of what is happening here on a daily basis. Because by the time you and I get off the camera in a few minutes, there's no telling what would have happened again.
Uh-huh.
So I just would like you to speak to us about what that kind of collective trauma could look like. And also, I talked about them having lingering effects of
Yes.
what we might expect, but even above that, how we should take care of ourselves.
I think that I know that I love that you brought up collective trauma. And collective trauma can go either way. And so what I'm seeing anger and I'm seeing fear. And really that fear is anger. And this is something where I've said there's so much political upheaval right now because history repeats itself and it is repeating itself. And until we learn how to live in harmony, we're going to continue this cycle over and over again. And we're not listening to each other. People want to be asked questions and they want to feel safe and they want to be heard. And the one thing that I am seeing that's a beautiful thing is that we have the collective trauma amongst a lot of marginalized communities, and they're joining together. And historically, they did join together. Malcolm X, Yuri Kochiyama. We need to do more of that. We need to join together. And I'm not talking about just doing protests. Of course, we need to contact our local legislature, but we need to support one another and we need to communicate and listen without judgment. And I think that that is that helps in moving through the collective trauma. And that storytelling piece of that is also very, very helpful, but not diminishing what people are saying, not questioning it, just listening without judgment. We need acceptance. And it's not a competition. It's not about, who has experienced this more than others and who needs this more than others. It's about uplifting each other and supporting one another. And we need to be upstanders,
Yeah,
upstanders. Yes.
I like the fact that you said that because sometimes we tend to think that our oppression, is worse, and
Yes.
the results of our oppression are
Yes.
worse than the oppression of someone else. But what you're saying is that everyone's lived experience is important, and we need to respect that and also let them tell us their stories. So, in that spirit of storytelling, I just want to know. I mean, I don't want to leave this on the table. We've talked about what the experience of being a Filipino American and how that was shaped. My question, I know I'm going back, but the question is, why do you think that there is so little known or spoken about that in much of Western history, in much of Western society?
There was an episode, the late Anthony Bourdain had an episode where he was in the Philippines. And he said, Filipinos are the friendliest people. They're the nicest people. But at the same time, I thought that was lovely. Thought that was wonderful. It was great when it came out. And we do have the reputation of being welcoming and so friendly. And that's great. But at the same time, there is the stereotype. So if you're and there's other marginalized populations that have negative stereotypes, and I know we should be grateful that we have this positive stereotype, but at the same time it puts us in a specific category, and it feeds into the microaggression of being complacent and just very quiet, and that we don't have a voice. But there's such a long history that a lot of people don't know about. And I think that I'm trying to remember your question because I'm so passionate about it. It's something where Filipino Americans have so much colonization, layers of colonization, that they've assimilated so much to the American culture that a lot of them actually don't want to learn about their culture. And so that's where the passion comes in, where we want to basically inform the public of the Filipino culture and our ethnic background, and so many layers of history that we're finding out and we're trying to educate people about.
I
And
really like what you're doing. Yeah, I like what you're doing. It's almost like pioneering something. I am sure there were people before, but this, at the level at which you're doing it, and your scholarship actually is telling a story, and which is really educating all of us. And I like that. So, specific to racial trauma, I am wondering if you have any ideas of what the lessons of history are related to racial trauma. What are the lessons of history as you see them?
yeah.
Because we need to learn from history, otherwise we'll be bound to repeat
Yes.
that. And so, what should we learn from what history tells us?
Well, here's the thing: we're not learning. And through lived experiences, such as what you said, through storytelling, lived experiences, but listening, that's where we can learn. But people are not listening. People are not acknowledging. They're so busy comparing. And the other thing that I do want to say, and adding into that when we're looking at racial trauma, interwoven with racial trauma is also it influences imposter syndrome. And I don't know if you experienced it. I don't mean to ask you a question, but I know that I experienced it, because when you're at the scholarly level that we experienced and that we continue to experience, as I was the first to not only get a master's degree, but to get a PhD, and I love my family, but we didn't really celebrate it too much. I celebrated it separately, but it's like, okay, what do you do with that? And through the whole time that I went through my studies of, I can't do this, and the weight on my shoulders of being the first representative of that. And so when I talk to students and the weight that we all carry as those representing our culture, our racial background, you do go through that racial trauma of, what if I can't do this? What if I fail? What is that going to mean? And it brings up a whole bunch of feelings that we carry on our shoulders of our ancestors and when they had to work through things that we did. So I remember toward the end of my time when I was defending my dissertation, you were there, and I'll never forget that. I felt the weight of my ancestors. I felt them supporting me at that point. I knew I was going to be okay. And we need to tap into our history to work through and process that racial trauma. And I feel that through the work that I've done and continue to do, that actually has helped me gain, and become post-traumatic growth. So I don't see myself as a victim. I see myself as somebody who really achieved that.
It's interesting because, I'm just imagining when you talked about feeling the weight and the presence of the ancestors. I have to think of that because you and I know, how many times are we in the room where we are the only ones who look like us,
Yes.
and that we are fortunate to be here, but it is also not without hard work.
Yes.
And so when you talk about the presence and the spirit of those ancestors, that really counts for a lot.
Yes.
It does count for a lot. And it also gives one some sense of responsibility to make sure that one does not disappoint, and that one also passes that on and empower the people who come after us. And so now, my friend, Dr. Tabag, let's talk about self-care. Yes. I am really guilty when it comes to this. I am not good. But I am good at balancing roles, but I'm not good at taking good care of myself. So how do you balance all of these roles while maintaining your personal life balance and caring for yourself? I know I know you go up to the Hudson Valley at least once a year to see all of those beautiful fall leaves, and you bike, right?
Yes. Well, right now I'm waiting for the spring. So, but I also, I would have to say that as a woman, as a Filipino American woman, the hardest thing I had to learn, and my, now colleague and friend was my dissertation advisor, but is now my colleague and friend. One of the things I learned from them was stop saying I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And there's a trap in that. As a woman, let alone, doesn't matter what your ethnic background is and as your race, and hopefully those that are listening. And I'm hoping that they would agree to say no and to set limits. You automatically are called a specific vulgarity, a negative label. Oh, you are and that's something where at this point, it doesn't bother me anymore. But in the beginning, part of my what I call mindfulness, I didn't really see it as self-care. I needed to be mindful, not to say yes to everything. In the beginning, it was really foreign to me. It was really hard, and I felt tremendous guilt, and I had to really work through that. And saying no and setting boundaries. Again, that you're doing the right thing when people are responding negatively to you saying no, and boundaries. And there's a way to do it. There's, of course, a much more professional way, depends on your level of relationship with the recipient. So that started out as my mindfulness practice. And then with my self-care, I don't even see exercise as self-care. I tell my students that all the time. That is not self-care. That's surviving. That is medicinal. So I don't see that as self-care. But for me, as I'm evolving in my and developmentally, we're always evolving. For me, and this is part of my culture, is music. because Filipinos we do love karaoke. We really do. And I missed that at the last conference. They all did karaoke. We all get together and do karaoke. But I really love music so much that it's in everything that I do. So music is definitely part of my self-care. I will listen to music at all times throughout the day. I love reading for leisure. And I that's really what I make sure that I have some time every day to do that. So
Yeah, music is powerful, isn't it?
it is.
And I come from a part of the world too where music is really big with Afro beats now
Yep.
everywhere you go. And so, but I cannot thank you enough for being here. I know how immensely busy your schedule is and how long it took us to schedule this. Right? So I am really grateful that you finally came. And so now I just would like you to really just tell us, give us some final words. And some people are in countries here, it will be tomorrow by the time they see it. And I want them to know that what they heard is also, they will know that what they heard is also of great value to them. But also, we understand that many people are feeling hopeless right now in countries around the world, and a lot of people who are not watching live now who are going to watch it later. I just want you to give us some final words.
Keep fighting. Please don't be a bystander, be an upstander. Listen to each other, support one another. If you're going through emotional turmoil, please seek someone that you can seek out, preferably a mental health counselor, therapist, specialist. There's many different credentials, and especially many different parts of the world. Please seek somebody out, because if you hold it in, it can really be very emotionally damaging. We don't want you walking around with unnecessary depression and anxiety. It's not your fault. And so you really deserve to speak to somebody to have them help you. Now, one of the things that is very hard to find is a therapist or a mental health clinician that shares your ethnic and racial background. I get it. That's might be impossible. But it's also something where you don't have to accept microaggressions if they make those statements. You can educate them. That's part of your therapy. That will help you take the power back. And I think that's something that we need to do, is all stand together and take the power back. We don't have to accept it. And we do have to stand up, and we have to keep on fighting. I know that it's hard. I go through that every day. I get sad every day. I'm trying to limit social media, but you can check your algorithms and all of your settings. But don't stay and implode and keep it within yourself and isolate. Seek help. That's what I definitely want to be able to send the message that's so
Right.
important.
And one of our watchers on Facebook has just written words that I think would speaks for me. She wrote, "Thank you. This is very eye-opening and hopeful. Thanks for bringing hope this
Oh,
evening and or afternoon, or for some people it's morning. But I'm really grateful that you were here, and I hope I can extract a promise from you that you'll be back."
I promise, and I am so grateful for your patience, and I'm so happy to meet with you and for us to just have this conversation. This is so, and it's so heartwarming for me. This helped me. See, we're just having conversations, right? And
Yeah.
it's just, it makes you feel that you're not alone.
Thank
So
you very much, Dr.
thank
Tabag.
you. Thank you.
We'll be in touch. Thanks a lot.
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.